Hello and welcome today to the Air and Cosmos studio, in which we have the honor of receiving General Morales. Good General, hello, Mr. Spellman. You are a former commander of Air Operations and Air Defense, the CDAOA. You were Major General of the Air Force. We're going to talk about perspectives. Has the Air Force made efforts up to today? First question, what is a Major General?
The term Major General is a bit strange and its meaning is not well understood. It's the second highest position in the Air and Space Force after the Chief of Staff. It's a bit like a chief executive officer in a company where there is a president and then a chief executive officer. Somewhat like any proportion kept between the president of the republic and the prime minister. In fact, the Major General of the Air and Space Army commands the general staff, the office structures that work directly for the benefit of the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And in that case, he ensures the management of the training and the management of all the means.
You recently joined the industrial group Arisia to support the ramp-up of the Air Force. We will discuss it in the second part of the interview. First, we'll briefly examine a recent situation from the past few years. In the Air and Space Force, already which is called and Space, it's a big difference compared to the past. There are two issues. The demand for sovereignty that only France implemented and which today is a reality. And we have this rise in power imposed by the return of Russia as an imperialist power, which threatens our allies and the European Union. So, first of all, what can we say about the relevance of the choices that have been made? First, we will start with the Rafale.
Generally speaking, I would say that even in light of the war in Ukraine, no one was wrong, no army was wrong. We really have in France, we have played high technology, rigorous training, the professionalism of the military. And in fact, it pays off. We see that if you have a professional army with well-used equipment, well, it works. So more particularly for the Air and Space Army, the technology of fighter planes is extremely advanced. The Rafale, which is a fourth generation aircraft, but still the top of the fourth generation.
The sensors are rather of 5 million. There you go.
Exactly. And then, in fact, we can discuss it a bit more at length afterwards, but it's mostly the way we're going to use them. Are they connected to each other? And there's a real revolution that's happening. In fact, we see that it's completely relevant. We also see that it's in the conventional field, but also in the field of nuclear deterrence for the Air and Space Army. The Strategic Air and Space Forces Command also carries out high-level demonstrative missions. Well, we show by this that we have not been mistaken at all and that the tactics being used, the equipment used is entirely sufficient for the threat situation we may face in a high-intensity conflict.
Despite this, we observe a range of activities in high-intensity conflicts, such as close air support. It has completely disappeared in Ukraine. We also see that swirling combat operations, I know that we train a lot in the armies. Is that ultimately things that have also disappeared? We shoot at each other at 30, 40, 50 kilometers if we can. Is it still relevant to continue training on these combat actions, which are necessarily not as useful as in the past?
So, indeed, in the combat we see in Ukraine, but in fact there is no use of the aerial component, so obviously we can't have air combat. There you go, or from afar, or then from close air support. Because in fact there is really an annihilation of both air environments on both sides due to a significant presence of surface air defense. No, in fact it's completely relevant. There will be close air combat, there will be fire support from the moment you have, for a period of time, air superiority. And so there you will deliver, and to the benefit of the ground maneuver, you will obviously have to deliver a lot of fire support weapons. And indeed, we can see it well, the Russians, where they are making good progress on the front, it's where they can deliver at a certain distance by aircraft. Powerful weaponry, in fact, that comes to support the ground troops. So there's really that. The swirling aerial combat is indeed a bit intense. One could say with extremely long-range missiles. Now, does that make sense? Yes, because in a fight there are different phases and you start from afar. And then as you get closer, as you avoid long-range missiles being fired, you end up with short-range missiles. And then after that, we're in swirling combat. So there's really a need to do this and to always train for this type of mission.
A few weeks ago, we also saw a study in which they explained that France, with these gusts, would certainly be relegated to second place. European states that have planes like the F-35? Was it ultimately a journalistic interpretation of a serious study? Or is it really, when we compare ourselves, we should be ashamed of what we are today?
So let's first take a look at the F-35. It's complicated because the aircraft's capabilities are still very well preserved, which is normal. In fact, it's really an airplane, another type of airplane compared to the Rafales. It's a little bit a stealth air combat platform, stealth air campaign command, but which carries little weaponry and which will need fourth generation aircraft behind. So we can indeed imagine when we have a first wave facing solar systems. I'm thinking of the S-400s, which carry extremely far, and even though we use a first wave of F-35s, but with a relay that is almost immediate behind, with these fourth generation planes like the Rafale. And then, once the solar threat is neutralized, we let these fourth generation planes have free reign, free field. So there are really two things that are different. And precisely the evolution of the Rafale will compensate for this lack of fifth generation. And in particular, I'm thinking of the Rafale F5 model, accompanied by an unmanned combat aerial vehicle, a combat drone, which will allow us to have this ability to penetrate the enemy stealthily through the CAV and having the relay behind with the
Rafale 5. Countries like Greece, who had considered buying the F-35 to counter the Turkish S-400S, are now questioning their decision. Ukraine demonstrates that S-400S can be destroyed using Soviet-era planes and missiles that perform effectively. Ultimately, this complementarity of stealth aircraft with a fourth and a half generation device, or even fifth for the Rafale, is that something that seems most optimal to you today?
Yes, exactly. And besides, I add one thing, something that the Rafale does extremely well is penetration missions. Very low altitude, very high speed, in fact, and which allows to deliver a weapon under the radar horizon of the opposing solar system, a long-range weapon. So behind there is obviously, it will not be able to several hundreds of kilometers, it will be complicated, but in fact it will still be able to approach a significant proximity to the solar system, to be able to hit, strike, threaten. So there is all of that, and then indeed all of that will evolve, and in particular we think of connected combat, because that's where we will have an ascendance. It's when we can have everything in data link and make timely decisions in real time to optimize the use of this or that means, who will be in the airspace at that time.
In fact, we see that France is the only country in Europe that decides to have the contact radios on board the Rafale up to the F4 standard enable communication between Rafale aircraft, without needing to rely on a NATO infrastructure with tactical data, the given waves 16 and 22. On the other hand, our European countries lack interoperability if we want to work outside of American knowledge.
Then we must surpass the Link 16 standard and improve L16 as the current rates are insufficient. So, if you really want to have an interconnected fight, you need much higher rates with modern waveforms like that of contact. So that's really taken into account, and then even more importantly, it's not just between aircraft, it's also with other environments, the terrestrial environment. And in fact, like this, with everything interconnected, you will be able to create an integration of different effects, and there will be a huge multiplier effect. All this through real-time command systems that will make the right decisions at the right time, and that can, on each weak point of...
apply the enemy's strength against them. So in fact, it's the SCAF system that is starting to have its building blocks, which is being implemented. We are still talking about having the Rafale until 2070, maybe even beyond. How do we guarantee today with the FE5 standard that the plane remains relevant for such a long term?
Gradually, we will see that there is more and more software that will be changed, modernized, updated, so it will always be relevant. And then we can imagine that we will not always be in high-intensity combat, hopefully. Fortunately, we can hope that our deterrence will be enough to prevent any high-intensity combat from occurring. In fact, we will ultimately have classic operations as we've had since the end of the Cold War. So there you have it. There will really be a place for this type of aircraft, planes, and then, in addition, whose flight time the cost of use is controlled. As we progress to more advanced technologies, it becomes increasingly complex.
It costs more and more. The F-35, apart from its difficulty of implementation, it costs today more than $40,000 a flight. Which leads the American Court of Auditors to say that the United States cannot sustain the economic effort to buy as many F-35s as planned. For export, they keep convincing Belgium and Switzerland that it's beneficial and won't exceed the cost of an F-16. Today, this is clearly not the case. I also had a question about air defense. Once again, we are observing the situation in Ukraine. Ukraine intercepts 2,500 cruise missiles, whether they are low-cost or KH-101 each month. They also implement low costs for that. So, as much for air dominance, the superiority of the Rafale, they seem relevant. As much for defense, we cannot rely on Aster-30. The Ukrainians use large machine guns and Yak-50 aircraft to shoot down enemy targets. What do we do if tomorrow we were faced with 2,000 missiles per month?
Yes, indeed, that's something that there is this saturation effect. And so we can clearly see that we cannot have very high technology weapons, therefore extremely expensive, to then try to intercept low cost. And so there really is, it's a new paradigm that is taken into account. With the use of the cannon, because we have very good cannon firing controls, a renewal of solar defense with bitumen cannons. So that's going to happen. And then, in fact, you can take quite old systems, but if precisely they are guided and controlled by modern command systems, well then you immediately have something extremely efficient. So that comes back. And then there are also studies to equip current aircraft with low-cost weaponry, which allows intercepting this type of drone. I'm thinking of the Shade 136, which are quite rudimentary, but anyway, we can't let them reach the target. So everyone is working on that. And then a small remark, I would say that we should not compare the cost of the missile that intercepts a drone, but rather the cost of the missile with the target that has been protected. If
we avoid losing a power plant,
protecting an air base or navy building is still worth shooting an asteroid.
A small question also about drones. We realize that the very large drones, the TB2S, the Ford Post-Air, on the Russian side, these drones are so big that they get detected. They abandoned the battlefield after sustaining heavy casualties. However, in France, we tend to invest in purchasing visibly American drones like Reapers and others. We've been talking about the Eurodrone for a long time, but in reality, shouldn't we maybe do both at the same time? But shouldn't we multiply the small drones that are managed by the army and not by the Air Force?
Yes, in fact, we should have both. I can't say that the large male drone like that, which doesn't move very fast at high altitude, is no longer useful at all, because already we said there won't necessarily be only high-intensity combat. And then we can imagine, for example, that these are drones that are behind the front lines to gather intelligence, capture electromagnetic signals that can monitor places where there is no battle. If I put myself in the place of the Ukrainians, it would be interesting to monitor, for example, the Belarusian border, and then there it would allow to see if a threat is coming or not. And so, as a result, to have the time to concentrate the troops elsewhere, and then to have the time to interpose them if there was something. So there's that. And then, in fact, all these drones, they're going to be used elsewhere. In fact, one can think if there are blockades to be made, maritime blockades, they will have to patrol at sea to spot, in fact, quote-unquote, pirate fleets. So there, you see, there will really be a use. And then afterwards, of course, I think there will still be, the bulk of our operations will be low intensity, where this type of drone is most useful. And
the Eurodrone, initially intended for maritime patrol, has garnered interest from countries like Japan. It's true that...
Exactly, indeed.
To go patrol on vast territories and immense surfaces like the sea, it's really something that is important. There are autonomies that are extremely long, and so these are drones that are not at all
useless, even currently. The question now facing Russia is how to respond to France's actions to achieve technological sovereignty, which may not be the case for its neighbors. The Germans are considering redeveloping their air defense, preferring to purchase American and Israeli systems rather than French in order to start from scratch. Do you think that ideologically our neighbors are ready to buy French rather than submit to the Americans?
Hard to say. I'm not in their shoes. It's true that indeed, one could say, since I buy American, I buy security, the American umbrella. However, the question should be asked, as it seems to be questioned. Furthermore, it's not always necessary for a nation to purchase weapons from another country. In fact, everything needs to be interoperable, and in fact, what matters in a solar defense is that everything is integrated, in fact. And there, it will really be effective. Ultimately, if any radar on European territory is capable of transmitting target position information to any European missile, well, there we will have reached the holy grail of solar defense. And so all of this will work. So indeed, very good to buy French. I am for derrière. Indeed, afterwards, maybe the French industry needs to keep up, because behind the scenes, there is a resurgence. It's a complex issue that doesn't happen instantly, but we can discuss it. And so there you have it. All armaments must be interoperable in any case.
The Rafale's contact radios, which I mentioned earlier, may not be compatible if other equipment does not align with French standards. They have come from years and years of research to be able to work outside the framework of NATO. Logically, we would save time by purchasing the standard, which France has already selected.
Exactly. And like that, everyone speaks the same language in the end, and everyone understands each other. The weapon systems can exchange with each other.
I'm visiting your second new hat for just a few weeks, the industrial dimension you mentioned. First, what does Arisia do?
So, Arisia, in fact, is a top-tier aeronautical equipment manufacturer. It really specializes in everything we carry under weapon planes or pylons, adapters, and ejectors. We attach the bombs and ammunition under the planes in Arisia, which is a significant part of the operations there. And then it also makes aeronautical equipment, including for civil aviation, parts for civil aviation. And then shooting training solutions for aerial shooting and air-to-ground shooting, as well as ground-to-ground shooting. And also it manufactures, so it has allowed France to regain sovereignty. It manufactures bomb bodies.
Of general use. We will get to that just after. The industrial dimension that you just mentioned, have there been any efforts already made? Has there been any public procurement that has made it possible to do the necessary, in industrial terms, to really ramp up? To ramp up?
Power. I'm going to say that with all humility because I've been discovering it for a few weeks. I see this side. It's quite interesting because it allows me to judge compared to what I thought when I was in the military and now that I'm in the industry. To increase its power, there are several things that can be done. First, there need to be firm orders from the state for the industry because the industry is not going to embark on investments without having insurance behind it, especially in armaments. So there need to be firm orders, and then after that, from there is a ramping up. And so now the industry, it knows how to do up to a certain stage with over time an improvement in manufacturing processes as well, significant work with all that we call logistics, the supply chain. Weapon carrying pylons are complex, consisting of around 3,000 components that must work together. So you have to deal with all the suppliers, and so all of this has to ramp up, be completely synchronized. And then there are also investments to be made. And in particular, this is what Arisia has been doing for several months by robotizing chains to be able to switch to operating rhythms, H24 thanks to this, and produce at a high pace. Afterwards, we see that we can do 15, 20, 30% more, 100% we can double. Beyond that, it starts to get more complicated there. You have to build a new factory, so there it's more difficult. But finally, for the Rafale planes, and so with the increase in pace of Rafale, there are carrying solutions for the Rafale planes, and so with the increase in pace of Rafale, well, Arisia aligns with the increase in pace of Dassault Aviation behind. So that's a first.
At 3 per month instead of 1 a few years ago. Yes, a few years ago, certainly 4 or 5. You see, in fact...
The step from 1 to 3 is already huge. Dassault Aviation can say yes, but I can go to 3 without any problem. All suppliers and their suppliers must be able to supply at 3 levels. So you see behind, there is really a lot of inertia. It takes a lot of time. Then there is also something else. And the last point is that undoubtedly the requirements must be lower than what we have had so far. Indeed, when you have equipment, even just ammunition, that you must keep for several years before using them, you have surface treatment so that it lasts a long time, so that there is no corrosion. Well, if we go into high intensity in times of war, we will need less. There will no longer be a need for surface treatments to preserve equipment. There will be fewer requirements, allowing for increased pace, as equipment will spend less time on production lines.
Yes, in particular. I understood that there were resins and ways to dry certain parts because it was especially for their preservation against humidity. If we supply them to Ukraine for use next week, there may not be a need to wait months.
Exactly. So now we can go much faster and then we can delete. It is the industrialist's responsibility to identify time-consuming steps and propose ways to reduce production time. In fact, by saying that you have 2 options, either we do it so that it doesn't last long for quick use, or we do it so that you can keep it for a long time. And from there, we will have 2 completely different manufacturing times.
You also talked about the 82 brand, which is the body of Bomblisse on which we put wings that allow. In fact, we were talking earlier about mass, about saturation for cheap. So in the end, we are right in the middle of it.
Yes, absolutely. So that's it. We put wings around it. Ammunition that works extremely well is the A2SM, which is produced by Safran. And so here it's a munition that is really formidable because it has a significant range and then a formidable precision. So behind, indeed, we are there. As a result, assembling the guidance kit takes more time than the bomb body. So afterwards, if we had to increase the pace of the bomb bodies, no problem, but the guidance kits also have to follow behind.
In terms of innovation, what are you working on? Are you already developing the UCAVs you mentioned for the FKAS program?
Yes, so indeed in innovation we see this revolution of drones. So in fact we have to work for drones no matter their size. There are more and more. So there is also something maybe we are less sensitive to. It's that if we ever go back, if the armies increase in power, there will be a training issue. We will have to train a lot of people. Similarly, Arazia, an industrialist with RR shooting training solutions, is also present. Air to ground can help to increase power and training by taking apart, by having a subcontracting of the training, in order to free up the army so that they can prepare for operations and go into operations. So there is also this part which is very important and on which industrialists can increase power and then help the armies.
Reduce flight training hours to allow more operational flexibility.
That's it with simulation, or use big data for a little bit almost. Individualize the progression paths of the different crews and thus make them progress more quickly.
Thank you so much. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon in the Southeast and Cosmos.